I'm Brian Mann. I'm the founder and creator of Cypress, and super excited to talk about a project that we've been working really hard on for most of the year. It's a test replay, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So we've got a pretty tight agenda for today. We're mostly going to be focusing on the benefits, the value, sort of the rationale behind why we decided to invest in test replay. We'll talk a little bit about the release mechanics, some of the upcoming changes that we're doing to best support this feature. And then I want to take the opportunity to parlay that conversation and give you all a little bit of a sneak peek into what the Cypress vision is, what we're focusing on for the second half of this year, and what to expect from us past test replay. And last but not least, as promised, we're also going to be including a couple slides about how you can get early access to the pre-release of test replay prior to it going GA. All right, so let's kick things off and talk a little bit about why we created test replay and specifically what problem it's solving. Now, if you've done any work in Cypress or web development in general, then you're probably already familiar with the really powerful built-in dev tools that we use. This is what you're using, all the time that you're writing and running tests and testing your app code or working in the app code. This is obviously Cypress, the latest version of it, and certainly we do a lot of nice things on top of the dev tools, giving you the ability to do time traveling. You can inspect the DOM. You can look at network requests and really get a bird's eye view into understanding exactly what's happening under the hood. So really all the tools are at your fingertips for debugging tests and working with them locally. But the problem comes in is that after you're done writing those tests locally and you go ahead and push them into CI, what often can happen is that CI introduces new variables that your local environment doesn't have. Could be actual environment variables. It could be using shared architecture, infrastructure that is shared across a bunch of different machines or different people pushing at the same time. It could be underpowered resources. There's a lot of different conditions and variables that can lead to unpredictable situations that are really difficult to produce. You may see a failure in CI, check it out, and attempt to reproduce it locally, and struggle with the ability to do that. And that's often when you experience a whole lot of a lot of time loss, very time consuming, a lot of pain, debugging failures or any kind of flaky tests with what you get out of Cypress today, which is your primary vehicle is videos and screenshots. And if we kind of look at what you may be doing now using the cloud to debug these, we can look at the screenshots, we can look at the video, and certainly that's a whole lot better than what we used to have back in the day, where you just had to look at standard out from CI. But there's still, this leaves a lot on the table, a lot left to be desired, because in this case, this screenshot gives us a cutoff command log. This video, even though I can scrub it back and forth, in fact, the actual error itself is cut off. I can't interact with any of this content, and a lot of all that information is basically locked away from me. And when I don't have access to that information, then it's very difficult to pinpoint, what is the precise underlying root cause of the error or the flaky test. And so, what do we aim to solve with test replay? First and foremost, what we aim to solve is basically taking that local experience that you get when you're writing and running tests locally, where you have all the power of dev tools, the ability to inspect network requests or the DOM, and bring that into the cloud so that when your tests are recorded in CI, you're going to have access to all of that information the same way that you do locally. So basically providing first-class tooling around that experience. And the goal here is that Test Replay is built in such a way that it dramatically accelerates your time to resolution, your ability to fix failures, and triage and understand the root cause behind flaky tests. And so I want to talk real quick just a little bit about how we're able to do this. What the architecture behind Test Replay is predicated under basically capturing all the important events, all the important information that happens between Cypress and the browser and even your test code. And behind the scenes, we're capturing all of that and we're stitching it back together, thereby enabling you to pause, play, rewind, or inspect anything just like you're running tests locally. And so the idea is that you can have just as much of a rich debugging experience when you're looking at things that have been recorded in the cloud from CI, and it becomes a natural extension of your local environment. So I want to kind of go through some of the primary features of Test Replay. Worth noting here is Test Replay is still in beta. It's still a pre-release. You should expect it to change, but already it's being in use today from some of the early adopters. We've been dog fooding it here, and it's been a really great experience so far. You'll basically see a lot of the same features that you get from the local Cypress app, except now it's displayed in the cloud. So in this case, one of the things that's different is that now we have like a scrubber. Like in the app today, you can really you can go back and forward in time, but you don't necessarily have an individual scrubber. So this allows us to pick times that aren't just related to the commands, but rather to step forward incrementally, go back, to pause it, or even change the playback speed. The next feature you might recognize basically works exactly the same way that it does in the Cypress app, namely that all of the command log events are completely interactive. We give you the ability to see the element highlighting, the hitboxes, to step forward and backwards between like requests and responses, or when you have action commands, the ability to step to see what happened before the action was triggered, and then subsequently afterwards. Basically exactly how you probably using the command log to do time traveling in the local Cypress app today. And you'll notice like the application under test. In this case, we're using like an internal simple application we call Sci Heroes. It's a basic single page application just meant to mimic a lot of the functionality that you may be testing in your own apps. And you can see here that there's really no trickery or sorcery here. Like it's not a video, it's not pixels, it's the actual DOM. So I have the ability to inspect it. I can obviously use the native dev tools, the element inspector here. I can see the CSS. I could make modifications and changes to it exactly as if it was running locally. So just like how you can scroll and you can inspect anything in your local application, the goal of Test Replay is to basically extend that and not have any lossiness that you would otherwise normally experience with a video or a screenshot. In addition to this, this has been one of the most requested features of the cloud, is the ability to actually inspect the individual network requests and network responses. The Cypress app today has always decided not to do this, primarily because you already have dev tools. Like you already have the dev tool experience, the ability to look at just about anything there. But certainly in the cloud, while we do get the element panel for free, we do not get network requests. We are not actually replaying these network requests. These things have already happened. Effectively, we're just basically streaming the data back in, but we're also adding a lot of the interactive capabilities that you normally would see in the command log. So in here, we have request responses, we have response bodies, so we can see status codes, we can see individual methods that were part of the request, JSON payloads, et cetera, et cetera. We also have console logs that we're capturing now. This is still one of the features that's being polished, but basically anything that the browser logs out naturally, whether it came from your application or whether it was a built-in warning or anything like that, we're automatically going to capture those and display them to you. And just like with now network traffic as well as console logs, all of these individual logs are interactive. It effectively does time travel whenever you hover over them, and then you can inspect the details. In addition to that, we've built in basically like I would argue a better control system for retries than probably even what the local app has. What we're doing is after we capture all of the information, we're effectively partitioning it by the individual attempt. And this allows you to just easily switch between them. And instead of having all that data sort of smushed together in one individual view, now you can flip between them and filter it, thereby allowing you to quickly compare, individual attempts. Like if a network request failed in one but passed in another, it would be really easy to switch back and forth and look at the difference between those individual requests or responses. So at a high level, these are some of the primary features that make up what Test Replay is. I'm now going to spend a few moments kind of talking about some of the release details, the rollout plan, the implications of these of rolling this out, and talk a little bit more about what are some of the benefits or in some cases the trade-offs in moving to a system like Test Replay. So the probably the first most important question you may be asking yourself is, when is this coming out? This will be coming out with version 13 of Cypress. And right now we're on track, or at least our current estimates are right around the end of the month, give or take, a small amount of time. Don't worry, you will get early access. The final slide of this presentation is going to basically give you instructions, and you'll also get an email listed, whatever email you registered with the same instructions. You don't have to worry about missing it when we get to that slide. And additionally, many of you asked in the questions for the tee-up for this webinar, specifically around how we were thinking about pricing and packaging. And I think this should make it super clear that we're expecting to bundle this into all of the existing plans. We're not changing our pricing. It's going to be included all the way down into the free tier. Now, I guess just to be super clear with this, it will require a Cypress Cloud account, even though this information is being captured from the test runner. It's all being parsed, analyzed, stored, put back together by our cloud services. This is not something where there's actually any like local functionality or any capability of the Cypress app whatsoever. It's all sending into the cloud. Cloud rehydrates it, puts it back together, and makes it accessible to you in your individual runs and the test details. Now, in order to support some of these changes, probably the other most frequent question that I saw asked from the attendees here was all about questions regarding Cypress's performance. There are two fairly significant changes coming in version 13 in order to support Test Replay. Certainly there is a cost from a performance perspective of basically listening for and attaching all of this information. But in our internal tests, we actually found that it's either the equivalent of video recording or it's actually less. And you can probably imagine why we're turning both of these off. Video recording, if you have a beefy enough machine with enough resources, I mean, it still influences the run, but if you have a underpowered machine, it falls over, it completely melts down. And now that we're utilizing the test replay, which is effectively like a high fidelity debugging experience, that really crushes out the need to do video recording. And in fact, in most cases, you'll probably experience performance that's a wash between them, or it will actually be better. But we're also aiming to make a second change, which is we intend to hide the app reporter UI. And just to quickly clarify, when we say the app reporter UI, we are talking about the command log on the left and the nav bar on top. Now, Cypress rendered these, even though their primary use case is in when you're writing tests like in open mode. We still rendered them in run mode, but for the purposes of capturing that information in the video and also in any screenshots. And with the introduction of test replay, both of those things are unnecessary. And so combining those two together, at least in our own internal tests, every application is different, every CI environment is different. You should experience actually a pretty reasonable bump in performance. I'll say our internal tests showed around 20–30%. You may experience more, you may experience less, but the net sum of really those subtractions as well as the addition of test replay, it should come out net positive in performance. There are some implications for this, and I'll talk through that. So while we intend to hide the app reporter UI, that means that for things like screenshots, there will not be a UI in that screenshot. In fact, what I have highlighted here in blue, that's your application under test. That is what would get rendered in the screenshot. And we'll talk in a second about those implications. Yeah, I already mentioned this. Basically, both of those two things contributed pretty significantly to performance. That's why we're turning them off, but only when test replay is enabled. If test replay is not enabled, we are still intending to turn video recording off by default, but if you want it back on, or you're running in a browser that doesn't support test replay, you can just turn it back on. And really the same thing with the app reporter UI. You just have to basically pass an environment variable and it'll flip back on. Now, as I already mentioned, both of these were contributing pretty significantly. They were putting pressure on CPU and memory, depending upon what environment you're running and your application. That could lead to pretty significantly increased run times. We did a lot of internal benchmarking where oftentimes like the video would be really choppy or drop a lot of frames. So moving away from that system to something like test replay, it should be not only faster, but you get access to way more information. It's completely interactive as opposed to a video is completely non-interactive. I already mentioned this, but the screenshots when a test fail, right now, that's probably the biggest gap between where we were as well as where we want to be with test replay. And that I would consider to be only like a temporary issue. Screenshots that fail will not have the reporter UI, but we intend to embed the screenshots into the test replay interface. So normally you'd see, your application, you can inspect the DOM, but we can also, pick a pattern in which we embed the image directly there. So that way you're still able to see the failure at the moment of failure as it rendered to the real browser, but it'll be surrounded by the interactive controls of Cypress, the command log, things like that. So the idea is you can just get access to that same information easily in this way, and there's no need to reduce performance and include, duplicative information that doesn't add anything. Once again, it's also information that over in pixels, you can't interact with it. So having all of that in test replay would be pretty significant advantage. There are also some other changes that we're making, and maybe depending upon your experience with Cypress, you might be familiar with this, you might not be, but by effectively moving in the direction of test replay, we are effectively promoting these types of this method of debugging to sort of supplant the screenshot and video artifacts. So everywhere that we were displaying links to artifacts, whether it's screenshots or videos, you'll now see test replay. This is actually a feature built into Cypress app itself. Like, this is not the cloud, this is the actual local application. In case you haven't used this, I highly recommend it. You log into the app and log into your user, you will be able to basically get access to like the latest failures in CI. We look at things like what branch you're on, and so we only surface failures in CI when your local branch matches what just got pushed, so you're not bombarded with information that's not relevant to you. And we do a lot of nice things like basically immediately jump you into the spec that failed, or in this case, if you wanted access to the test replay, you could just click that, it would open the cloud and go directly to that failing test. Of course, we're also updating the common areas in the cloud that already you would normally access screenshots and videos. So you should see test replay basically everywhere. As I mentioned before, this is still a pre-release. There are certainly known issues. The team's been doing a great job of knocking out a ton of things over the last few days, the last few weeks, with the intention, like I said, estimates put us around the end of the month for this to get released. There were a few decisions that we made. One was that, at least initially, that we are only going to support Chromium-based browsers, so no Firefox, no WebKit, but Electron, Chrome, obviously Chromium, Canary, Edge, all of those will have support for this. This basically just allowed us to reduce scope a bit and get this feature out much faster. Because your tests are completely unbounded, we have people that write tests that go on for way too long, and there are situations in which just the sheer amount of data that we collect can lead to some performance problems. Those are already understood, they're recognized, and over time that we'll be ironing those out. There are still a couple issues for component testing, as well as if you came up using Cypress on a really old version. Previously, we used to not enforce test isolation. Now that is something that we enforce, and so if you're using all the defaults, test isolation being off does not apply to you. But if that's something that you specifically overrode, there are still a few issues with test replay. If you know anything about that feature, you can probably guess as to why. In many ways, test replay effectively reveals why, some of the reasons or rationale behind why we started enforcing test isolation. These aren't deal breakers by any means. It just means, like, in its current state, there may be some side effects to using those two things, but the intention there is to fully support them. There are also still quite a few minor unreleased features while it's in pre-release, but I expect most, if not all, of those to ship before it becomes GA. But it is still pre-release, and so when you get early access, that's just something to keep in mind. Now, with all that said, that sort of test replay in a nutshell, I did want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about what to expect subsequently, or some of the other things that we're working on in parallel alongside of a test replay. I'm incredibly excited about releasing this. It's been really interesting, really challenging to work on. Had a great time building this out with the team. But there are some other things that will come post test replay that I think I'm honestly even more excited about. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to share some of those things with you today. So test replay is really the foundational system that makes like a giant leap forward for us towards accomplishing our vision and mission, right? It's in many ways like the foundation of how we expect it to accomplish our vision and mission. And today, many of the developers here at Cypress are still focused on the delivery of test replay, but already, other teams are already focused on the next era, the next set of features that are going to build off of a test replay. And we are aiming for trying to have some of them released before the end of the year. And so, I wanted to talk through just a quick preview of what some of those focus areas look like. I'm not going to read this verbatim, but if I were to quickly summarize it, our mission and vision has always been, predicated on 3 steps. The first being helping developers in the local experience, the open source application, basically take a lot of the pain out of automated tests. And our philosophy has always been to, guide you towards the right patterns and the right processes and the right approach. And of course, once we unlock that ability, now you have the ability to write a lot of tests. You'll test effectively always increase in size over time, and then that unlocks sort of the next challenge, in which if you have a lot of tests and your team is writing them every single day, then you're going to need help running them and managing the quality of them at scale, and that's CI. And that's really the first point, has been what the open source app has been focused on. The cloud has been focused on the second, and the architectural systems, the foundational systems of test replay, I see unlocking really the third bullet here, which is going beyond just what the test does from a functional standpoint, from a validation standpoint. And I believe there is a really unique opportunity for us to automatically expand that investment and use it to power, unique insights into your actual application quality. Because that is, after all, a big part of why we write tests in the first place, is sort of to ensure that there's application quality. And if we can leverage those tests as drivers to basically give you insights that happen pre-production, I think that that offers a tremendous amount of upside and flexibility and added value to the investment of writing tests from the get-go. And so this is not an exhaustive list, but these are our primary focus areas. And I'm going to talk mostly about visual diffing, but I'm going to make mention of the other 2. These are the 3 areas that we are currently focused on, that we are aiming to have at least some of these released by the end of the year. And I'm going to speak to sort of how the system of test replay puts us in a position to do these, I would say, or I would argue, uniquely and better than anyone else that is currently offering these types of services. And so let's start with visual diffing. In many ways, I think this is probably the most well-known of the 3, and a lot of the patterns introduced here apply to the others. And so we'll kind of build up from that. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't done visual diffing, but certainly it can add a tremendous amount of value. Visual diffing goes hand in hand with functional testing. Oftentimes you're using a service that you're directly integrating into your functional tests. And the benefit here is that there will always be a need to functionally verify something works, that, hey, when I click this button, the right things happen. But there's always a need to still ensure that things are not just functional, but they're also they look good. Certainly, you could have CSS bugs, or you could have changes, regressions that pass all the functional tests, but still, to a user, they would perceive this as being, totally broken, or at least not a pleasant experience to use. So visual goes hand in hand with functional. I would say the second benefit of visual diffing is that it's not just about knowing what did change, but if you have a system that is measuring all the visual changes, you also get a lot of value by knowing what didn't change, which means that, you're safe. It's effectively being able to prove, prove against like a false negative. Now, visual diffing, in case you haven't used it, it's pretty straightforward. You use, a service, or you build your own. It takes an image of your application or your component, and it uses those images that it visually takes like a screenshot or a snapshot of, and it compares them across commits. So the idea here is that that's commit 1, that's commit 2. There's a visual difference, and it's going to point it out. Unlike functional tests, a visual diff does not imply that anything is good or bad. It simply just services the change. It can't know whether that change was intentional or whether that change was unintentional. That will always be left up to the humans to basically figure out. That's why many of these systems you see, just because there's a change, it doesn't fail the test. It's the kind of thing that you generally have like a review or an approval system, because like I said, only the human really knows whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether that was intentional or not. Now, as much promise as services like this or patterns offer, they are not without their challenges and limitations. And I've kind of simplified this down to 3 things: that in order to do visual diffing, you've got to integrate it at the code level. There's generally a learning curve regarding like, when do you do this? What do you call it? How many of these should you do on every test, most important test? And there's a lot of planning involved with this in order to make this into an effective system. Here's an example of our own code. And you can see right here that, the individual developers writing this have to basically decide when to do this at all the right times. And that's what really leads us to the second problem, which is, because these are third-party services, even though they have integrations with many of the testing frameworks out there, they basically are a service that just receives what they receive. If the test framework hands it the right thing, then you're good. But if it hands it the wrong thing, or the user, the way that you wrote your test code leads to some non-determinism, then it's just like how testing was, I would say, 10 years ago before Cypress. Like, you have assertions that don't retry, and a visual surface basically is like has one shot to get the snapshot of what it receives exactly perfectly, and if anything is off about it, you're going to get a failure. That leads to a lot of instability and flakiness. Here's an example from some of our own like internal diffs using a really popular service, where you have commit 1, you have commit 2. And of course, that's the visual difference. In this case, it's like a loading spinner. Nothing else has really changed, but for whatever reason, one commit was catching it with that animation on, another one wasn't. So that's what I mean, sort of, if anything is different about it, if you do not hand back the exact same state every single time to the service, you're going to get noise like this. That erodes your confidence in the visual diffs, because you get a lot of false positives, you get a lot of noise in the system, and that sort of melts down everything. Last part is, I think, not necessarily unique to visual diffing services, but because there's this coupling between visual diffing and functional testing, there's often like a lack of history or context, because really, like, they're coming from the same process, they're coming from the same object, one's just calling the other, but because they're split across different services, you lose a lot of like that rich, seamless integration that you might otherwise have if this functionality was built in. In this case, like this is Percy. Effectively, like even though every single one of these snapshots came from within our test, there's nothing that's directly tying it back to the test, and we have to look across two different systems, even though you could argue and say that there is a direct dependency or relationship between the test and the visual snapshot, and one that would be really useful to see side by side and see together. All right. Where I'm going with this is, for all of these things that we've kind of talked about, the test replace system is putting us in a position to do things like visual diffing or other analogs or other common services, but doing them in such a way that basically alleviates all of these individual challenges. What test replay is putting us in a position to be able to do is to effectively do visual diffing without requiring any code. Nobody will have to write anything. And because for us, instead of receiving like one frame to take a snapshot, we actually receive every single permutation that exists. It's actually impossible for us to miss. Every single change in the DOM will be captured by a test replay, which means that there are no timing issues. It is literally not possible to miss it. If it happened in your application, then we have that exact state. We can rebuild it to exactly what it looked like in the application. And as I mentioned in the third point, there's a lot of advantages to having all this baked into one individual system. There's a lot of benefit, and this is the kind of thing that gives us a really unique competitive advantage and a unique position by taking what we already have, the systems, the integration into CI and everything else, and the ability to understand both what the test is doing as well as what the visual system is doing. Just as an example here, this is actually a real example. I mentioned or showed some animated GIFs from the system that we were testing earlier, Sky.Heroes, and the underlying system that is building test replay basically automatically found all of these and derives them. It discovers them through the use of your own code, or sorry, through the test. Like, I didn't write any specific code. I didn't inform the system what I cared about. It's able to use enough individual signals and rules to basically produce for you what are all your unique application states. And so I'm using this as an example. We talked about visual diffing because in many ways, like the thumbnail here is sort of the representation of that individual page or that page state. But in many ways, like whether it's a thumbnail or anything else, these are all just unique states in the application, and they can be rendered visually, but they can also be scored. Other dimensions about them can basically be scored in the same way that a diff can be created. And I'm not going to go, don't have enough time today to kind of talk about some of the other focus areas, so I'm not going to go into those details. But the idea behind this is that for every single page or page state, not only can you produce like a visual diff of these things, but like I said, you can take any dimension on that page, whether it's accessibility, whether it's a lighthouse score, anything like that, or interactivity coverage, which is kind of our own homegrown definition, and basically produce a pattern in which throughout the writing of the test, as Cypress navigates your application and discovers these unique states, it'll be able to produce these reports that speak directly back to what is really, I think, at the heart and the intention of testing, is to basically get insight into your application of quality to ensure the application quality. And so this is what I would say the next era of what we're going to be looking to build up the cloud. It comes post test replay, and it's I think hopefully you'll hear a lot more updates from us about these things throughout the second half of this year. All right, that's what I've got, and as promised, the last slide. Early access test replay.